Who do you imagine with the word gladiator? A huge muscular warrior, a fearless slave who goes to battle and salutes those going to death greet you. So, get ready to see women among them. And, most surprisingly, most women chose this profession voluntarily and even belonged to rich and noble families, although in Roman society it was considered a disgrace. But why did they go to the arena? Is it true that they fought naked? She walks through a dark tunnel in which nothing is visible, and it seems to her that this is the longest journey in her life, although she already sees the light and smells a wild beast, the lion waiting for her there. Her heart is ready to jump out of her chest, but she gathers her willpower and takes the last step. Mick! And the sun blinded her. The cry of the crowd, which suddenly froze when they saw that there was a woman in the gladiator arena. She took off her helmet, even though she knew she shouldn't. She knew that he, the man she hated, was the one who was most surprised and shocked right now. It is not known exactly when, for the first time, a woman entered the arena of the Colosseum with a sword in her hand, but judging by the literary source that has come up to us, the art of female gladiators reached during the reign of Emperor Neron. If in more ancient times girls from noble families were forbidden to visit the arena, and married matrons were allowed to sit only in the back rows, then under Neron, as Dion Cassie writes, morals fell so deeply that aristocrats played in theaters and even went into the arena and fought with wild animals. The famous Tacit also confirms this fact, describing the games of the 63rd year of the new era, during which noble Roman women and even senators themselves fought in duels in the arena. Our heroine's name is Claudia. As you know, women in ancient Rome did not even have proper names, as well as, in fact, rights. Her father's name was Claudius. Here she is, Claudia. Her father was an unusual man. He was a wealthy merchant and traveled a lot on business. Other countries with their customs have greatly changed his view of the world. He tried to give as much as possible to his children. Claudia had a younger brother who had dreamed of gladiator fights since childhood, and her father allowed her to go to the stands with him and even train with him when, at his request, he hired a teacher, a former gladiator Sergius. But one day their happy life ended. My father was poisoned on one of the pens. Then suddenly her brother died unexpectedly, and all her father's huge fortune was left to her. But a woman in ancient Rome had no right to dispose of property, and Claudia was appointed a guardian, her father's brother, the very man she hated, because she was sure that he had poisoned her father and brother, and more than anything she dreamed of taking revenge on him. And her uncle immediately told her that he wanted to marry her. Claudia knew that she would rather die than marry him, and then she realized what she needed to do. In ancient Rome, female gladiators were considered a disgrace to their families and immediately lost hope of marriage. Gladiators fought bare-chested, and their status, in general, was equated to the status of prostitutes, as well as the status of male gladiators. But if the latter quietly started families, then women became such pariahs and forever fell into the black list of brides. The brave warriors were applauded by the crowd, but they were absolutely not respected in society. A Roman matron was supposed to stay at home. Even on the street she had no right to go out alone, unaccompanied. Everything was decided for her by her father, then her husband, or, at least, her brother, and here she was half naked and in the arena. By the way, women who were kicked out of the house by their spouse, for example, for treason, often went to gladiators. Such a woman no longer had the right to remarry, and if her father did not take her back, then she had only one way out: recruitment into the gladiatrices, because they were provided with shelter and food. Gladiatrices and aristocrats were trained by personal trainers. Our Claudia, as you remember, studied at home with her brother, for whom gladiators were real idols. But the slaves had a hard time. In gladiator schools, they had a much harder time than men. They were taught to fight extremely cruelly. The training lasted from morning until late at night and took all their strength. They trained with heavy chains on their legs, and fencing lessons were hard for us. The girls had to learn to fight with 2 hands on swords, to wield a spear and a dart, a net and a trident. Forcibly or voluntarily becoming gladiators, they adopted the same code of honor that operated among male gladiators. That is, they refused many rights and declared themselves a legally dead person, accepted obligations that they would prefer death to shame, and would never run away from the arena if they lost the fight. Like a man, gladiatrix was obliged to voluntarily expose her throat to the winner or commit suicide. Of course, they were made into high-class warriors, but their lives were usually short. The first female gladiator Girardesca Minutius was able and confused to become a famous warrior. She spent more than 200 fights, she was adored by the audience and bathed in applause, but during one of the fights she died at the hands of a dwarf, and yesterday's queen of the arena was given to wild animals to eat. It was awkward for Claudia to stand in front of the crowd practically naked. She was wearing a small loincloth, protection on the hands and feet. She held a shield and a sword in her hands, demonstrating their nakedness to the crowd. Female gladiators also gave the Romans aesthetic and erotic pleasure. Although initially gladiatrices did not fight topless, but in a leather bandage covering the chest, which was called strophe. Now Claudia had to survive in a duel with a lion and become a gladiator. She stood in the arena and looked at the predator lazily approaching her. After the 1st century, those who fought with beasts became a separate class of fighters. They were not called gladiators, but venators. They fought with the venabula, that was the name of a short hunting spear. And before that, judging by the bas-reliefs, the most ordinary gladiators with swords entered the arena against lions, panthers, or bears. In most cases, of course, the man won, but if the beast emerged victorious, he was left alive and then exposed to the next duel. There were even their own stars among the animals, famous for killing several venators. So, the bear, who was given the name Innocence, was known for her cruelty. Contrary to popular misconceptions, many female gladiators were not slaves taken captive at all, and not poor people forced to earn their bread this way. They were Roman women from privileged classes. Aristocrats did not enter the arena for money. In this way they tried to assert themselves, show everyone their strength and independence and, of course, gain fame. After all, the gladiators of that time were something like today's movie stars. It has become very fashionable to take part in such battles over time. It seems that this was also a challenge to the prevailing morality at that time, according to which participation in gladiatorial fights was regarded as a disgrace for a woman. There were so many girls who dreamed of trying themselves as a gladiator that in the 11th year of the new era, by a special decree, the Roman Senate even officially banned free women under the age of 20 from entering the arena. And a few years later, a ban was announced for men and women from the upper classes, senators and horsemen. But the gladiator sent the slaves to the arena with the first Nero. By his command, they created a detachment because of Ethiopian, Syrian and other slaves. Poor girls without any training had to fight with wild animals, armed only with short daggers. Of course, they mostly died. Only those few who were lucky enough to survive in this bloody battle were given freedom. The lion was small. How many times had she and her brother watched such duels in the arena of the Colosseum? She remembered all the lessons that the former gladiator Sergius had given them, but she had no practice. Several times the animal almost mauled her. The crowd watched the fight with bated breath. Claudia's strength was already running out. She thought that she had overestimated herself, and remembered how she and her brother dreamed of entering the arena as a child. None of the sources mention battles between female gladiators and male gladiators. A bas-relief from Glycarnassus depicts two women fighting. It can be assumed that in the arena the Roman women got lost only with equal strength, that is, with other women. And gladiators didn't go to their deaths very often. They were very expensive, and their owners or agents did not want them to be killed. Gladiator fights were a real show. The fighters were trained to make the fight as interesting as possible for the audience. And only one of the 5 gladiator fights could end in death. For example, games at the Saturnalia festival in the middle of winter, like now. These battles were fought to the death. In a year, the famous gladiator had no more than 2 battles. They received for each a huge sum, approximately equal to the annual salary of the best artisan. And with the participation of women, they were held not in the main part, but at the very end of the games. Rupert Matthews writes in the Gladiators book, "There were few female gladiators, and most often they acted as pygnaeries, amusing the audience, rather than gladiators, sowing death." Gladiatrices staged a real show, playing small theatrical productions on historical and even erotic themes, played scenes from myths, fought with dwarfs for the amusement of the public. Emperor Domitian led the fashion for night frivolous fights of female gladiators. Naked gladiatrices fought with beasts and with each other in the light of torches. Erotic battles were arranged for a limited public outside the walls of Patricia's estates. So, the Emperor Caligula loved to invite gladiatrices to his pens, during which completely naked girls, including fighting with swords. Barely returning from the beast, Claudia abruptly turned around and stabbed him in the heart with her sword. The animal fell. The crowd roared. Our heroine raised her hand with a sword up, saluting the audience in honor of the victory. She looked for her uncle and triumphed. She managed to thwart all his plans. Now he will not be able to marry her and get his hands on his father's fortune. At that moment in the arena, she experienced an incredible delight. She felt the love of the crowd, felt that she had won and was able to survive. Finally, she realized that she was free now. The whole point is to become a gladiator. It was the only chance for a noble Roman woman to get a fabulous sum, get rich and become famous. If the lady won the battle, she became financially independent and no longer obeyed the orders of her father, husband, or guardian, as in the case of our heroine. Fighting as men, gladiatrices, and in ordinary life had to try to lead the same way of life, which, of course, looked like a challenge to the norms accepted in society. Now Claudia had a roof over her head and a long-awaited independence. And she knew for sure that she would find a way to take revenge on her uncle for the murder of her father and brother. And very soon she had such an opportunity. That's what she spent her first fee on. Former gladiators worked part-time, including doing illegal things. After the death of her guardian, she was already in charge of her own property and could not fight in the arena. However, here, in the Colosseum, she found not only freedom, but also love. But about that another time.